I paid my guardian's utilities for 2 years, but they secretly took my cousins on a luxury vacation without me. You would have ruined it, said my aunt. 8 hours later, they were blowing up my phone begging me to answer. I, 24M, never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest because what happened 3 days ago completely changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. My aunt and uncle took me in, and I've been living with them and my 2 cousins ever since. When I turned 18 and started working full-time at a tech company, I insisted on contributing to household expenses. My aunt initially refused, but I pushed because I felt it was the right thing to do. For the past 2 years, I've been paying their entire utility bill, electricity, water, internet, everything. It comes to about $400 monthly, which isn't nothing on my salary, but I wanted to show gratitude for them taking me in. My cousins are both in college now, and we've always been close. Or so I thought. Last Friday, I came home from work expecting the usual family dinner chaos. Instead, I found the house eerily quiet. My aunt was in the kitchen, and when I asked where everyone was, she casually mentioned that my uncle and cousins had gone out for dinner. Nothing unusual there, so I grabbed some leftovers and went to my room. But something felt off. The house stayed quiet all weekend. My cousins' rooms were too clean, like they'd been tidied up for an extended absence. When I asked my aunt about it on Sunday, she got defensive and said they were staying at friends' places for a few days. Her tone was sharp, almost guilty. Monday morning, I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break when my world flipped upside down. There was my younger cousin posting Instagram stories from what looked like a luxury resort. Palm trees, infinity pools, ocean views. The timestamp showed it was from that very morning. My hands shook as I clicked through more stories. There was my uncle lounging by a pool. My other cousin at what looked like an expensive beachside restaurant. And then the final blow, a group photo of all 3 of them with the caption, "Family Vacation Vibes." I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone in disbelief. They were on vacation. An expensive vacation, judging by the resort. And they'd lied to me about it. The betrayal hit me like a physical punch. These were the people I'd been supporting financially for 2 years. The people I considered my real family after losing my parents. And they'd excluded me from what was clearly a planned family trip. I drove home that evening with my mind racing. My aunt was in the living room watching TV when I walked in. I asked her directly where my uncle and cousins really were. She looked caught, stammering something about them extending their visit with friends. I pulled out my phone and showed her the Instagram stories. The color drained from her face. She was quiet for a long moment before finally admitting they were on a week-long vacation in Mexico. When I asked why I wasn't invited, her response destroyed what was left of my trust in this family. She told me they discussed it and decided I wouldn't enjoy it. That I was too serious, too focused on work. That I would have ruined the fun atmosphere they wanted. She said it like it was a reasonable explanation, like excluding the person who'd been financially supporting their household was just a minor oversight. I asked her how they could afford a luxury vacation when they'd been struggling to pay utilities before I started helping. Her expression shifted to something defensive and almost annoyed. She reminded me that my uncle had gotten a promotion 6 months ago, and they'd been saving up. She said they deserved a break without having to worry about anyone else's feelings. That's when it clicked. The promotion my uncle got 6 months ago. Around the same time, they stopped seeming stressed about money. They'd been letting me pay their utilities while saving for this vacation. I'd essentially been funding their leisure while being excluded from it. I told my aunt I needed time to think and went to my room. But I wasn't thinking about forgiveness or understanding their perspective. I was thinking about the $9,600 I'd given them over 2 years. I was thinking about every time I'd chosen to eat cheaper lunches or skip buying things I wanted so I could make sure their bills were covered. I was thinking about how stupid I'd been. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I researched my options and found out that the house utilities were still in my uncle's name, but I'd been paying directly to the companies. I had records of every payment, every transaction. Legally, I could stop paying any time since I'd never signed any formal agreement. But I wanted to do more than just stop paying. I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd thrown away. The next morning, I called each utility company. I explained that I would no longer be covering the account and requested that all future bills be sent directly to the account holder. Then I transferred exactly $400, 1 month's worth of utilities, into a new savings account I opened. If they could save for vacations while I covered their expenses, I could save too. But the real move came next. I'd been documenting everything over the past 2 years, not intentionally, just out of habit. I had records of every utility payment, screenshots of my banking showing the transfers, even photos I'd taken of bills when I was calculating how much to pay. I organized it all into a folder. Then I waited. They weren't supposed to return until Thursday, but Tuesday evening my phone started buzzing. My uncle was calling. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Then again. By the third call, I answered. His voice was panicked. He told me there was something wrong with their electricity. It had been shut off. He was calling from the resort, trying to figure out what happened. He asked if I'd paid the bill this month. I told him I hadn't. There was silence on the other end. Then he asked why, and I could hear my aunt in the background demanding to know what was going on. I explained calmly that since they could afford luxury vacations, they clearly didn't need my financial help anymore. I told him I'd realized I was being taken advantage of and had decided to stop enabling it. He started arguing, saying it wasn't like that they'd always been grateful. He said they'd planned to invite me on the next trip. I asked him when the electricity was supposed to be shut off, and he said he didn't know because he never looked at the bills. I always handled everything. That's when I told him the electricity had been scheduled for disconnection yesterday, and the water would be shut off tomorrow if the overdue balance wasn't paid. I could hear my aunt in the background getting louder, saying something about me being ungrateful. My uncle asked me to please just pay it this once, and they'd figure everything out when they got home. He sounded desperate now. I told him I'd already made other arrangements for my money and hung up. Within an hour, my phone was exploding. Calls from my uncle, my aunt, both cousins. Text messages ranging from apologetic to angry to desperate. My aunt sent a long text explaining that they'd wanted to surprise me with a better trip later. My younger cousin called me crying, saying she didn't know I'd been excluded from the planning and that it wasn't fair. I didn't respond to any of them. By Wednesday morning, the calls were constant. My uncle had apparently tried to pay the utility bills from Mexico, but couldn't access online accounts he'd never set up. The overdue notices were piling up, and late fees were adding up. My aunt left a voicemail saying I was being petty and that family doesn't abandon family over a misunderstanding. That word, misunderstanding, made my blood boil. There was no misunderstanding. They'd deliberately excluded me while benefiting from my financial support. They'd lied to my face about where they were. And now they wanted to frame it as a simple miscommunication. Wednesday evening, I got a call from my older cousin. She was more level-headed than the others, and she admitted they'd messed up badly. She said they'd gotten caught up in planning something fun and hadn't thought about how it would affect me. She asked what it would take to fix this. I told her it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about being treated like family instead of a convenient ATM. I said that if they wanted to repair this relationship, they needed to start by being honest about what they'd done and why. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if I was going to move out. The question surprised me. I hadn't even considered it yet. But as soon as she said it, I realized that was probably the inevitable outcome. How could I stay in a house where I was seen as an outsider funding insiders' lifestyles? Thursday came, and they were supposed to return that evening. The calls had stopped by then. I think they'd realized I wasn't going to answer. But I could see the Instagram stories showing them cutting their vacation short, looking stressed and unhappy as they packed up. I spent Thursday evening apartment hunting online. I'd been saving money beyond the utility payments, and I had enough for a security deposit and first month's rent. I found a decent one-bedroom place about 20 minutes away and scheduled a viewing for Friday. They got home around 10 p.m. Thursday. I heard the car pull up, heard the front door open, heard their voices in the hallway. Tense, whispered conversations. I stayed in my room with the door locked. Around 11 p.m., there was a soft knock. My aunt's voice asking if we could talk. I told her through the door that I wasn't ready to talk yet. She said they needed to discuss the utility situation, and I reminded her that it was no longer my situation to discuss. Friday morning, I left for work before anyone else was awake. When I came home that evening, my uncle was waiting in the living room. He looked exhausted and older somehow. He said they needed to have a family meeting. I sat down but didn't say anything. He started explaining that they'd managed to get the utilities turned back on by paying all the overdue balances plus late fees. It had cost them almost $800, double what I usually paid because of the penalties. He said they hadn't realized how much they'd been depending on my contributions. My aunt joined us, looking uncomfortable. She said they wanted to apologize for not including me in the vacation. But then she added that they'd been planning it as a surprise for my uncle's birthday and that it was supposed to be just immediate family. That's when I lost it. I asked her when I'd stopped being immediate family. I reminded her that I'd been living there for 8 years, that I'd been contributing financially for 2 years, that I considered them my real family after losing my parents. She got defensive, saying that of course I was family, but that sometimes adults need time together without having to worry about everyone else's needs. She said I was being overly sensitive and that this was all getting blown out of proportion. I stood up and told them I was moving out. The words came out before I'd fully decided, but as soon as I said them, I knew it was the right choice. Both my cousins had come downstairs during the conversation, and my younger cousin started crying, saying she didn't want me to leave. My older cousin asked why I was being so extreme, that we could work this out as a family. I told them that families don't lie to each other. Families don't exclude members while taking their money. And families definitely don't try to gaslight someone into thinking their hurt feelings are unreasonable. My uncle asked what it would take for me to stay. I told him nothing. The damage was done. I'd learned exactly how they saw me, and I couldn't unsee it. Update 1. It's been a week since I moved out, and the fallout has been intense. I found a great apartment and was able to move in immediately since the previous tenant had left it in good condition. My new place is smaller, but it's mine, and I don't have to worry about whether I'm wanted there. The first few days were rough. My cousins kept calling and texting, trying to get me to reconsider. My younger cousin sent me a long message saying she'd argued with her parents about excluding me and that she'd wanted to invite me herself. My older cousin offered to pay me back for some of the utility money if I'd consider moving back, but it was my aunt's reaction that really showed me I'd made the right choice. She called me Tuesday night, absolutely furious. She said I was being vindictive and cruel, that I was punishing the whole family for one mistake. She said my parents would be ashamed of how I was treating the people who'd taken me in. That last part hit me hard, not because she was right, but because she was so wrong. My parents taught me to be generous and grateful, but they also taught me to respect myself. They would have been proud that I stood up for myself instead of accepting being treated as less than family. The really telling part came when she said they couldn't afford the house payments without my utility contribution. She admitted that my uncle's promotion hadn't been as significant as they'd made it seem, and they'd been counting on my money to make their budget work. Then she asked if I'd be willing to continue paying utilities even though I'd moved out, just until they could adjust their finances. I couldn't believe the audacity. They'd excluded me from their family vacation while using my money, lied to me about it, tried to justify it, and now wanted me to continue funding their lifestyle from a distance. I told her no, hung up, and blocked her number. My uncle showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening. He looked awful, stressed and tired. He said the family was falling apart without me there, that my cousins were barely speaking to him and my aunt. He admitted they'd made a terrible mistake and asked what he could do to fix it. I told him the truth, that I didn't think it could be fixed. Trust isn't something you can just repair with apologies. I'd spent 2 years believing I was a valued family member, contributing to a household that appreciated me. Finding out I was just a convenient source of funding while being excluded from actual family activities had shattered something fundamental. He asked if I'd consider family therapy, all of us together. I told him I'd think about it, but honestly, I don't see the point. The problem wasn't communication. It was their values and how they saw me. The apartment hunting turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Living alone has reminded me what it feels like to make decisions without worrying about other people's approval. I'm cooking what I want, decorating how I like, and most importantly, I'm saving the $400 I was spending on their utilities. In just 1 week, I've already started feeling financially freer. My work has noticed the improvement in my mood too. I didn't realize how much stress I'd been carrying about the family dynamics until it was gone. My boss mentioned that I seemed more focused and confident in our team meetings. The hardest part has been the loneliness. I do miss the noise and activity of living with other people, but I've started reaching out to friends I'd lost touch with, and I'm planning to join some social groups. I realized I'd been using my living situation as an excuse not to build relationships outside the family. Update 2. 2 weeks have passed, and things have gotten more complicated. My older cousin reached out through a mutual friend because I'd blocked all their numbers. She wanted to meet for coffee to talk without her parents involved. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown where we used to study together sometimes. She looked genuinely remorseful and started by admitting that the vacation situation was worse than I knew. Apparently, they'd been planning it for 3 months. It wasn't a spontaneous decision or a surprise for my uncle's birthday. They'd actively discussed whether to invite me multiple times and kept deciding against it. The reasons were even more hurtful than I'd imagined. My aunt had argued that I was too responsible and would want to stick to budgets and schedules. My uncle thought I'd judged them for spending money on luxury when they'd been accepting my utility payments. My younger cousin had wanted to invite me, but got overruled by the adults. But the worst part was that they'd used my utility payments as part of their vacation planning. They'd calculated that my $400 monthly contribution gave them extra room in their budget for the trip. I'd literally been funding my own exclusion. My older cousin said she'd gone along with it because she didn't want family drama, but she'd felt guilty the entire time. She said the vacation had been tense because they all knew what they'd done was wrong. My younger cousin had barely participated in activities and kept saying they should have brought me. She offered to pay me back for the utilities, all of it, $9,600. Her part-time job and savings could cover it, she said. She wanted to make it right. I told her I appreciated the gesture, but it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about belonging. They'd made me feel like I didn't belong in the family while taking my financial contributions. You can't just pay someone back for that kind of emotional damage. She started crying, saying she missed having me around, that the house felt wrong without me. She said her parents were fighting constantly now, blaming each other for the situation. My younger cousin had barely spoken to them since I left. Part of me felt bad for them, but a bigger part of me felt vindicated. They were finally experiencing consequences for their actions. She asked if I'd consider coming to family dinner this Sunday, not to move back, just to talk things through. She said my aunt and uncle wanted to apologize properly and discuss how to move forward. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about whether I was being too harsh. Maybe families do make mistakes, and maybe forgiveness is more important than being right. But then I remembered the Instagram photos of them enjoying their luxury vacation while lying to me about where they were, and the anger came back. I decided to test something. I drove by their house Thursday evening, not to visit, just to see what was happening. The lights were on, but there was only one car in the driveway. The yard looked a little overgrown, and there were some packages piled up by the front door that hadn't been brought inside. It struck me how much I'd been doing around the house without realizing it. I'd been the one who brought in packages, mowed the lawn when my uncle was busy, helped with household maintenance. I hadn't just been paying utilities. I'd been contributing to the household in ways that went beyond money. Friday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my younger cousin, calling from a friend's phone. She was crying and said she couldn't stand living at home anymore. Everyone was angry and stressed, and she felt responsible for the whole situation because she'd posted the vacation photos that exposed the lie. I told her it wasn't her fault. She hadn't created the problem. She'd just revealed it. But she said my aunt kept making comments about how posting on social media had ruined everything, and my uncle was working extra hours to make up for the money they'd spent on utility deposits and late fees. She asked if she could come visit my apartment sometime. She said she wanted to see where I was living and make sure I was okay. I told her she could come over Saturday afternoon. When she arrived, she looked around my small apartment with a mixture of sadness and admiration. She said it was cozy and that she liked how I decorated it. Then she sat on my couch and told me the full story of what had been happening at home. Apparently, my aunt and uncle were now arguing about money constantly. Without my utility contribution, they were struggling to maintain their lifestyle. My uncle had applied for overtime shifts, and my aunt was considering getting a part-time job. They'd realized how much they'd been depending on my financial help. But more than that, the emotional dynamic of the house had changed. My older cousin was barely speaking to them, angry that they'd driven me away. My younger cousin felt caught in the middle and guilty about the whole situation. Family dinners had become tense, silent affairs. She said they'd talked about selling the house and moving somewhere smaller, but my uncle was resistant because he'd lived there for 15 years. They were stuck between needing my financial contribution and being too proud to admit they needed it. Then she asked me something that caught me off guard. She wanted to know if I'd been unhappy living with them before the vacation incident. She said my aunt had been saying that I'd probably wanted to move out anyway and had just used this as an excuse. I told her honestly that I hadn't been unhappy, but I also hadn't been truly happy. I'd felt obligated to contribute financially and grateful for being taken in, but I'd never felt like an equal member of the family. The vacation incident had just made that inequality impossible to ignore. She said she wished she could move out too, but she was only 19 and still in college. She felt trapped living with parents who were now stressed and fighting all the time. Before she left, she hugged me and said she understood why I couldn't come back, but she hoped we could still have a relationship separate from her parents. I told her of course we could, and that she was always welcome at my apartment. After she left, I realized that my decision to move out hadn't just affected me. It had forced everyone in that family to confront the dysfunction that had been building for years. Maybe that was necessary, even if it was painful. Update 3. It's been a month since I moved out, and I've made a decision about the family dinner invitation. I'm going to go, but not because I'm considering moving back. I'm going because I want closure and to make my boundaries crystal clear. The past 2 weeks have been enlightening. I've had individual conversations with both my cousins, and I've learned more about the family dynamics than I ever knew while living there. My older cousin revealed that my aunt and uncle had been arguing about money for over a year before I started paying utilities. My contribution hadn't just helped with bills, it had temporarily masked deeper financial problems. My uncle's spending habits and my aunt's unwillingness to budget properly had created ongoing tension that my utility payments had hidden. She also told me that they'd taken a loan against the house to pay for the vacation. It wasn't just savings from my uncle's promotion. They'd borrowed money for a luxury trip while letting me pay their basic expenses. The financial irresponsibility was even worse than I'd thought. My younger cousin shared something that really put things in perspective. She said that before I moved out, she'd never realized how much work I did around the house. She'd started helping more with chores and maintenance, and it made her appreciate how much I'd been contributing beyond just money. But the most revealing conversation was with a coworker whose family had taken in his cousin years ago. He said his family had made mistakes too, but they'd worked hard to make sure his cousin felt included and valued, not just financially useful. It made me realize that taking someone in comes with emotional responsibilities, not just providing shelter. I've also been doing some reflection on my own behavior. Was I too passive in the relationship? Did I contribute to the dynamic by always being the responsible one who paid bills and never complained? Maybe, but that doesn't excuse what they did. The apartment has become a real home now. I've had friends over for dinner, joined a hiking group, and started taking evening classes in graphic design, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was managing household responsibilities. Financially, I'm in the best shape I've ever been. The $400 I was spending on utilities, plus not contributing to other household expenses, has allowed me to build up my emergency fund and start investing. I've realized how much my living situation was limiting my financial growth. But I've also realized something else. I do miss being part of a family unit. Not the dysfunction and the taking advantage, but the sense of belonging somewhere, of having people who care about your day-to-day life. I'm working on building that through friendships and community involvement, but it's a slower process. Tomorrow is the family dinner. I've decided to go with a clear agenda. I want to hear their apologies, but more importantly, I want to explain why this can't be fixed with just words. I want them to understand that trust, once broken this way, doesn't just heal because people say they're sorry. I'm also going to make it clear that while I'm willing to maintain relationships with my cousins, my relationship with my aunt and uncle has fundamentally changed. They're no longer my guardians or parental figures. They're just relatives who made choices that showed me where I stood with them. I've prepared myself for them to try to guilt me about leaving, to blame me for the family problems, or to minimize what they did. I've also prepared for the possibility that they'll offer compromises or promises that might be tempting but wouldn't address the core issue. The truth is, I've realized that moving out wasn't just about the vacation or the money. It was about growing up and recognizing when a relationship isn't serving you anymore. Sometimes the people who help you at one stage of your life aren't the right people for the next stage. I'll post an update after tomorrow's dinner. Whatever happens, I know I've made the right choice for my life and my future. Final update. The family dinner was exactly what I expected and somehow worse than I imagined. I arrived at 6 p.m. as planned. The house felt strange, like visiting a place you used to live but don't anymore. My younger cousin hugged me immediately, and my older cousin smiled but looked nervous. My aunt and uncle were in the dining room, and the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. Dinner was awkward. My aunt had made my favorite meal, which felt like emotional manipulation rather than a genuine gesture. The conversation was stilted, with everyone avoiding the obvious topic until dessert. Finally, my uncle cleared his throat and said they wanted to apologize. He gave a long speech about how they'd made mistakes and how much they valued me as family. My aunt added that they'd been thoughtless and that they understood I was hurt. But then came the part that confirmed I'd made the right decision. My aunt said they'd learned their lesson and wanted me to move back home. She said they'd include me in all future family activities and that we could put this behind us. When I asked what specifically they'd learned, the answers were telling. My uncle talked about better communication and planning. My aunt mentioned being more considerate. But neither of them acknowledged the fundamental issue, that they'd seen me as a financial contributor rather than a family member. I asked them directly if they'd had to choose between including me in the vacation or giving up my utility payments. What would they have chosen? The silence stretched too long. My aunt finally said it wasn't a fair question because they wouldn't have been in that position. But my uncle's face gave away the answer. They would have chosen the money. I told them I appreciated the apologies, but I wasn't coming back. I explained that the issue wasn't just the vacation. It was years of being treated as a helpful outsider rather than true family. The vacation had just made it impossible to ignore anymore. My aunt got defensive, saying I was being ungrateful and that they provided for me when I had nowhere else to go. She said most people wouldn't have been as generous as they'd been. That's when I lost my patience. I reminded her that I'd been paying them $400 monthly for 2 years, plus contributing to household maintenance and chores. I'd been grateful, but I'd also been contributing far more than just taking up space. The conversation deteriorated from there. My uncle accused me of being vindictive and holding grudges. My aunt said I was abandoning family over pride. They both insisted that excluding me from one vacation didn't erase 8 years of providing me a home. My cousins tried to mediate, but it was clear the adults had already decided I was being unreasonable. When I got up to leave, my aunt made one final comment that sealed my decision permanently. She said that maybe this was for the best, since I'd always been more serious and responsible than the rest of the family anyway. She said I'd probably be happier living alone where I could control everything. It was meant to hurt, but it actually felt liberating. She was right. I was more responsible, and I was happier having control over my own life and finances. I hugged my cousins goodbye and told them my door was always open for them individually. I shook hands with my aunt and uncle and thanked them for everything they'd done for me, but made it clear this was goodbye to the family relationship. Walking out of that house for what I knew was the last time felt like closing a chapter of my life that had needed to end. It's been 3 days since the dinner, and I feel more at peace than I have in months. My cousins have both reached out to maintain our relationships separately from their parents. My older cousin even said she's considering moving out herself once she finishes college, having seen how much happier I seem living independently. I've realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who don't value you properly, even if they're family. Blood doesn't obligate you to accept being treated poorly, and gratitude doesn't require you to sacrifice your self-respect. I'm building a new life based on genuine relationships rather than obligation and financial entanglement. It's smaller but more authentic, and that feels like exactly what I needed. To anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, trust your instincts. If you feel like you're being taken advantage of or treated as less than family while being expected to contribute like family, you probably are. And you deserve better than that, regardless of your history with those people. Family should be the people who value you for who you are, not what you provide. I'm working on building that kind of family now, one genuine relationship at a time.